Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingracia.
Hey guys, what up? Welcome back to the Power of Purity podcast. I'm really glad that you could be with me today, and I'm very excited about the things that we've been talking about, because we're in the middle of a series of episodes that I'm calling The Sexual Alliance. And we've been learning that it's God's will, plan, design, and intention that a married couple have a sexual alliance within the context of their marriage, which means that they limit any and all expressions of their corresponding sexualities exclusively to one another. And one of the key things that we've learned is that even though most couples assume that they have a sexual alliance, in reality, many, if not most couples, do not have a true sexual alliance, because the fact is that somebody within the context of the marriage is stealing orgasms. They're expressing their sexual gift apart from their spouse, and their spouse doesn't know it, and so the expression of their sexual gift is not limited exclusively to their spouse. And so we're talking about this concept of the sexual alliance and the implications of what it would mean to bring our sexual gift back into our marriage, back into alignment with God and this place of exclusivity and promise, where I have a true alliance with my spouse, that I will only express my sexual gift with them. It means that my body belongs to my spouse. My sexual interest and desire and attention and focus belongs to my spouse. It means that my penis, if I'm a man, my orgasm belongs exclusively to my spouse. I will not have an orgasm apart from my spouse. It means that I will not take out my sexual gift and use my sexual gift or play with my sexual gift apart from my spouse, and vice versa for women. And I have 19 principles of the sexual alliance. This is part number 5, and we've made it through the first 14 principles. I'm not going to take the time at the moment to review those 14 principles, but if you haven't heard them, I invite you to go back and listen to part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4 of the sexual alliance. Today brings us to part 5, where we're going to continue with principle 15 of the sexual alliance, which is this: the sexual alliance will help you establish a sexual rhythm that works in your relationship. Now, as previously noted, the Bible clearly teaches that husbands and wives should be available to one another sexually, and this is a very important aspect of the sexual alliance. When you enter a true sexual alliance with your spouse, you need to both realize that you're making a profoundly serious and holy promise to one another. And the sexual alliance will require both of you to commit to be sexually available to one another on a regular basis. And the fact is just this: if you're going to commit to a sexual alliance, to sexual exclusivity within the context of your marriage, then you're going to have to participate sexually with your spouse in your marriage. So the alliance is going to require both of you to commit to be sexually available to one another on a regular basis. And in view of this, the two of you are going to have to find what I might call a sexual rhythm or a sexual equilibrium that works for both of you. For example, one person might want sex every single day, and the other person might like sex once a month. So the sexual alliance, if it's authentic, is going to require the two of you to communicate and to cooperate with each other and to kind of hammer out and to find a compromise that works for the two of you together, given your situation and how you both feel and your desires. So, for example, in this situation, maybe this couple would decide, we're going to have sex once a week. because I'd like it every day, but you only want it once a month. So if we're going to have a sexual alliance that's authentic and it really works, we're going to have to figure this out, and we're going to have to get this equilibrium. So let's try once a week. And you see, what this means is it's going to create a kind of tension and require give and take from both people in the marriage, because the spouse who wants sex every single day, they're going to have to really stretch to agree to just once a week. But the spouse that only wants sex once a month, they're really going to have to stretch themselves to step up to the plate to say, I'm going to do this once a week because that's what my spouse needs. So the point is this, you guys, if you're really serious about establishing a genuine sexual alliance with each other, you're going to have to find a sexual rhythm that works well for both of you. And in fact, I might suggest that this is a big part of the reason of the failure of the sexual alliance in so many marriages, because married people, in fact, they're missing each other. They're out of step with each other. They don't know how to talk or communicate about these things. And so they never do find a sexual rhythm that's working for them together. And somebody's unhappy. Somebody wants more sex than they're getting. And so they're tempted to begin to act out sexually apart from their spouse, apart from their marriage covenant, you see. And so they begin to double dip. They begin to get bonus orgasms. And therefore the sexual alliance becomes violated in their situation, their marriage. And so a true sexual alliance is going to require a couple to establish a sexual rhythm in their marriage that's going to work for the two of them. And just in the way of personal testimony, you guys, I'll just say a few words here and kind of remind you. I trust that if you're this deep into the podcast, most of you have probably heard my story from the early episodes. But you know what a disaster my marriage was, and Sherry and I were really missing each other, and we would go for prolonged periods of time without having sex. So I was acting out in all these different ways, and it was an absolute mess. So when we came down to the place where we were hammering out our sexual alliance, and let me just say this, that without us even understanding what we were doing at the time, I didn't have the verbiage of the sexual alliance. I didn't understand that terminology. I didn't have the framework or understanding. But in fact, that's exactly what Sherry and I were doing. That's what God was leading us to do, to establish a true sexual alliance in our marriage. And so basically, I came to the place where I made a covenant to Sherry. I will never, ever express my sexual gift apart from you again. That's where God led me through my holy vow. And you'll remember that from my story. And Sherry came to the place where she said, if you'll commit your holy vow to me, if you'll commit to never, ever have an orgasm apart from me, then I'll commit to you that we will have sex at least once a week from now on. And I raised my hand immediately. I said, are you kidding me? Sign me up. I was used to going months and months without sex, so once a week to me would be like heaven. And so we kind of forged this agreement of a sexual rhythm in our marriage, you see. I'll agree to not masturbate. I'll agree to the alliance, and you're agreeing to the alliance, and we're realizing we're going to have to work with each other, cooperate with each other, and find a rhythm here that works for us. And so she promised at least once a week. And so we began that vow together, and we went for some weeks and months. And I'm just telling you guys the truth here. In a short matter of time, it was very hard for me once a week. And so I appealed to Sherry, and this is just the truth. And I said, babe, is there any chance we could go to twice a week? And I promise, if we could go to twice a week, I will never ask you for 3 times a week. But just once a week is really hard for me. And so she said, I'll try. And so together, it took us some time, give and take and communication and honesty and trying to move toward one another and be aware of what the other person needed and what they preferred and what they were asking for. And we were able to work together, and we were able to forge this sexual alliance, this sexual rhythm. And I'm telling you guys, this is so awesome. I just sit here and I give praise to God. I just want to shout to God because of what He's done in my heart, my life, my marriage, in my wife. I'm telling you guys, it's an absolute miracle. And I have honored my wife for the past 16 years and 10 months as of the day of recording this podcast. I have honored my sexual alliance, and my wife has honored the alliance, and we have been living a true sexual alliance. Our sexual gifts belong to one another. We honor one another. We have a sexual exclusivity. We do not express our sexual gifts apart from one another. We do not masturbate apart from each other. We don't steal orgasms. You see, we have a true alliance with one another, and a gigantic part of this alliance is this commitment that we have to each other, this rhythm that we figured out. And I'm just telling you guys that it's this sexual alliance that has empowered me to become the man of purity that I have become by God's grace. But you know what? It isn't just God's grace. It's also my wife's grace and my wife's participation in the situation. And I believe this is God's original design from the very beginning. It's almost as if God knew, Tony, dude, any man, you're going to try to go out into this world and be a man of purity. The temptation is overwhelming. The opportunity to act out is overwhelming. It's going to be incredibly hard for you to do this. So I've got a plan. I'm going to create a woman. I'm going to bring her to you. She's going to be your wife. And it's my plan and design and intention that you enter into this alliance with your wife. And you guys are going to have this commitment. You're going to have each other's back, and you're going to be allies. You're going to have an alliance around sex in your marriage. And because of your devotion and loyalty and commitment to one another and what you're finding in each other, it's going to empower you to resist temptation. It's going to empower you to be the person of purity that I'm calling you to be. So that's where this concept of the alliance is born, you guys. I can't say strong enough how much I believe in this and how important it is and how necessary it is for married men to become men of sexual purity. There is no doubt in my mind that if you have your wife on your side and if you're able to forge this alliance, that it creates the possibility, it's going to make it so much easier for a man to achieve sexual purity in his life. So praise be to God. And that's why I believe the sexual alliance is worth the fight, and it's worth the work that you're going to have to do to get your marriage to the place where you can have and begin to function in a true sexual alliance. And by the way, let me just speak to something that I can hear through this microphone. I can hear a man saying this or thinking this. But Tony, yeah, that's great for you. That worked out good for you, but you don't know my situation because I have a wife who never, ever wants sex. If I had a wife that would enter into an alliance with me and give me sex on a regular basis, I would love that. But my wife isn't there. She's not willing to do that. Well, dude, all I can tell you is that I get it because that's where my wife and I were. When we began this process, we were an absolute mess, and we were very, very far apart from one another sexually. We almost never, ever had sex. It was very infrequent, months and months and months apart. So God called me to sexual purity, to sexual exclusivity, to make this holy vow and commitment to my wife. I will not express my orgasm apart from my wife. And I entered into the vow, even though we were a mess, but it freed us to begin to work, and we went to counseling and begin to deal with our issues. And it was not an easy process, but it was a redemptive process. And remember what I shared at the end of the last episode. God invites us into the template of the gospel. God invited us into death. He invited me into a kind of dying, you see. But God is faithful, and the resurrection comes after the death and burial. And so if we will do our best to align our hearts and lives with God, begin to cooperate with God, and follow the narrow path that leads to life, that leads to God's redemptive intention for our lives and situation, God will be faithful, and you will make progress, and there will be healing in the context of your marriage if you and your wife are willing to do the work, and it's possible for you to close the gap as you move from the couple you've been together toward the couple God's calling you to be, and as you learn these principles, and as you learn to deal with these issues and establish this sexual rhythm and this sexual alliance, I'm telling you, I just believe that God has for you what God had for me in my marriage, and that's why I'm on this podcast sharing this, because it's our hope and our heart that our story can help and encourage and point the way for others. Praise be to God. And with that being said, it brings me to principle 16 of the sexual alliance, and I think this principle is really, really important. In fact, I think I could talk about it for a long, long time, so I'm going to do my best to convey the concept and yet do it in a way that's abbreviated at least a little bit. But principle 16 is this: the sexual alliance will help you to reduce and eliminate many of the confusing and negative dynamics that have existed around sex and have contributed to the unhealthy and counterproductive cycles that have existed in your relationship. And that was quite a mouthful, so just for the fun of it, I'm going to restate that to make sure that you got it. Principle 16, the sexual alliance will help you to reduce and eliminate many of the confusing and negative dynamics that have existed around sex and have contributed to the unhealthy and counterproductive cycles that have existed in your relationship. And I have here 10 sub-principles that I'm going to share with you guys under this point. But let me just say it this way to start off. Do you know how much weirdness there is around sex? Even in marriage, for married people, there is so much weirdness. You see, when my wife and I were a mess, I always wanted sex, right? I'm always sitting there wondering, I wonder if tonight's the night. When am I going to get some? When will sex happen again? Maybe tonight. So I have this principle called paranoid anticipation, you see. That's step number 1. I never know when I'm going to get sex, and therefore I'm anticipating it maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. Will it be this week? Will it be this month? And this kind of paranoia, and I'm freaked out all the time because I don't know when sex is going to happen. So do you see how the sexual alliance is going to eliminate that weirdness and that negative dynamic? Because when I establish a sexual alliance with my wife, and I know that we have an agreement that we're going to have sex twice a week, then it eliminates paranoid anticipation. I don't have to sit there and be worried and freaked out all the time trying to figure out, when am I going to get sex again? Because if it doesn't happen today, it's okay, because I know it's going to happen the next day or two. So it's like this tremendous weight off of my shoulders. And by the way, concerning this issue of paranoid anticipation, I heard a story that I really liked, so I'll share it with you. And I may have shared this in an earlier episode of the podcast. I don't know. If I did, please forgive me. But anyway, this man goes to a seminar about sex, and there's about 500 people in the room, and there's the expert sex therapist, psychologist up there teaching about sex and marriage. And along the way of the seminar, the expert asked the audience, how many of you here have sex? How many couples have sex at least once a day? And several hands in the audience go up. Then the expert says, well, how many of you have sex once a week on an average? And more hands go up, quite a few hands go up once a week. Okay, great. Well, how many couples here on an average have sex once a month? And a bunch of hands go up all around the audience. And then the expert asks, well, is there anybody here? How many people have sex on an average of once a year? And in the back of the room, one hand goes up, and this guy is so excited. He's jumping up and down, up and down. He's so excited and enthusiastic, and he's waving his hand to be seen waving. And the expert says, Sir, I see your hand back there, but why are you so excited? You get sex once a year, and yet you're so excited. And the guy yells out, today's the day. Of course he's excited. You see, he's had paranoid anticipation, and finally today is the day. So paranoid anticipation is one of these dynamics, and it leads to principle number 2 of the weird, confusing negative dynamics, which is perpetual disappointment. Can you see how paranoid anticipation leads to perpetual disappointment? Because there's a verse in the Bible that says something like, hope deferred breaks the human heart. So when I'm anticipating something and it doesn't happen, I have paranoid anticipation, and yet it doesn't happen. So this naturally leads to a kind of perpetual disappointment, because I'm hoping maybe we'll get sex today, but it does. I'm disappointed. Well, maybe it'll be tomorrow. I'm disappointed again. Maybe it'll be this week. I'm disappointed again. So this paranoid anticipation leads quite naturally to this perpetual sense of disappointment, which leads to step number 3, which is growing animosity. You see, because I would like to have sex with my wife. I'd like to have sex with my spouse, and I'm anticipating it, but it never happens, and therefore I'm perpetually disappointed. So before I know it, like a seed growing in my heart, I have this growing sense of animosity toward my wife and a kind of resentment. God says that we're married. Her body belongs to me. I should be able to have sex. She's my wife, but I never get sex. So I'm beginning to resent her and have animosity toward her. And this leads to step number 4, which I call unending pressure. This typically would be upon the lesser desire spouse. You see, I always wanted sex, and my wife knew that I wanted sex. So she would read into that from her side of the equation a kind of pressure. So she would say things like what so many people say, all you ever want is sex, 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 sex. I feel this constant pressure, this unending pressure from you for sex, and you're pressuring me so much it makes me not want to have sex with you. So you see, we're getting into this vortex and this very counterproductive cycle where I want sex, I'm anticipating, which leads to my disappointment, which leads to my animosity and resentment, which my wife begins to interpret as a kind of pressure, which leads to step number 5, which I call justified denial, which means that my wife now can deny me sex and justify it in her own head and heart and mind, because she's saying, all you ever want is sex from me, and you're paranoid, and you mope around here, and you have like this animosity. I can detect it, like you resent me over this, and you're pressuring me for sex. So of course I don't want to have sex with you. Why would I want to have sex with a man like you? And she feels justified in her denial to have sex with me. So this leads to step number 6, which is a continual stalemate. So now we're locked into these adversarial positions where we're both hurt, we're both confused, we're both disoriented, we both feel justified because I feel like I want sex, and I have a right to sex, and I have a right to be disappointed, and I can't help resent you because you won't have sex with me. And she feels this pressure and feels justified to deny me. So now we're locked into this continual stalemate, and this is big, big trouble because now we're in this vortex that's very, very, very counterproductive. And I hate to say it, but do you know that people live in this place, number 6, of a continual stalemate? They live in this place for years and years and years. And if you're not careful, you can get trapped in this place of this perpetual, continual stalemate for 20 or 30 years or more. And that leads quite naturally then to step number 7, which I call acting out. And acting out then is what people begin to do because their marriage is a mess now. Their marriage is disoriented. They never ever get sex, or they don't get nearly as much sex as they want to get in the context of their marriage. And the sex that's happening in their marriage is very convoluted and weird and kind of dysfunctional, and it's confusing and negative because of all these swirling dynamics that are counterproductive, this paranoid anticipation, which leads to perpetual disappointment, which leads to growing animosity, which leads to unending pressure and justified denial and continual stalemate. So at some point, somebody says, the heck with it. I'm going to act out then. I don't get sex from my wife, then I'm going to look at porn. I'm going to masturbate. I'm going to go to a strip club. I'm going to have an affair. I'm going to look at Craigslist. I'm going to have a cyber chat or a cyber sex. And so people begin to act out, and they feel justified because sex isn't happening in their marriage. So they begin to act out, which often leads to step number 8, which is caught in the act. And so many times people that are acting out eventually get caught, right? He gets caught in the affair. He gets caught looking at the porn. She gets caught having an affair. And that leads to step 9, which is relational trauma. Now the person who was betrayed is hurt and confused. They feel betrayed and overwhelmed. How could you do that? You had an affair. You acted out. You've been looking at porn. How dare you? I'm so hurt. I'm so offended. You betrayed our marriage. And that leads to step 10, which is shattered trust. And now trust is broken and damage is done. And it's unbelievable how this cycle has escalated like a snowball rolling down a hill, getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more powerful and more momentum. Paranoid anticipation leads to perpetual disappointment, which leads to growing animosity, which leads to unending pressure, which leads to justified denial and continual stalemate, which leads to acting out, which leads to caught in the act, which leads to relational trauma, which leads to shattered trust. But my point in sharing all of this, you guys, is to verify Principle 16 of the sexual alliance. Listen to it one more time. The sexual alliance will help you to reduce and eliminate many of the confusing and negative dynamics that have existed around sex and have contributed to the unhealthy and counterproductive cycles that have existed in your relationship. Could you guys imagine having a marriage that's beginning to function in a healthy way? You have an authentic sexual alliance, and you're functioning in a sexual rhythm that's working for you and your wife. And that means that there's no more of these confusing and negative dynamics. Could you imagine having a marriage where you have no more paranoid anticipation because you know you're going to get sex this week, which means that you don't have to be disappointed because your anticipation isn't always being shattered, which means you don't have to have growing animosity, which means your wife doesn't have to feel pressured or feel justified to deny sex to you, which means you guys are no longer in a stalemate, which means nobody has to act out to get their orgasms, And since they're not acting out, that means nobody's going to get caught in the act, which means there's not going to be relational trauma, which means there's not going to be shattered trust, which means you guys are entering into a healthy, whole, beautiful, awesome, rewarding, and satisfying and happy marriage, the way God always intended it to be. So the point is this: as you establish a functioning sexual alliance in your marriage, many of these confusing and negative dynamics that have been so powerful in the past will be reduced and eliminated and help the two of you begin to function in a healthier way than you've ever functioned before. Praise be to God. And with that being said, you guys, I see that the clock is running out on me, but I'd like to go ahead and close today's episode by doing a quick review of these principles of the sexual alliance. I have a total of 19, and we have now covered 16 of the principles as follows. Number 1, the definition of the sexual alliance. Number 2, the biblical basis for the sexual alliance. Number 3, most couples assume they have a sexual alliance. Number 4, the sexual alliance that many couples assume they have is often way too vague. Number 5, the sexual alliance often fails when the reality of life sets in. Number 6, many couples, if not most couples, do not have a true sexual alliance. Number 7, questions about the sexual alliance. Number 8, every couple must decide if they want a true sexual alliance. Number 9, the sexual alliance will give you the opportunity to come clean with one another. Number 10, the sexual alliance may lead you to one of the biggest crossroads of your lives. Do we disclose to each other the truth of who we really are as sexual persons and the extent of our sexual activity since we've been married? Number 11, the inevitable question, isn't it better to not tell the truth? Number 12, the sexual alliance may require a prolonged period of sexual abstinence while you process the truth of what you revealed to one another. Number 13, realize that you can forgive and trust can be reestablished. Number 14, the sexual alliance will give both of you the opportunity to face, admit, and process the sexual dysfunction that's existed in your relationship. Number 15, the sexual alliance will help you to establish a sexual rhythm that works in your relationship. Number 16, the sexual alliance will help you to reduce and eliminate many of the confusing and negative dynamics that have existed around sex and have contributed to the unhealthy and counterproductive cycles that have existed in your relationship. And with that, you guys, I'm going to wrap up today. I hope you can come back with me. I look forward to seeing you in our next episode of the Power of Purity podcast, where we'll continue with Principle 17 of the Sexual Alliance. God bless you guys, and have an awesome day.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.